أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. O Lord, open the doors of wisdom and mercy and shower your blessings upon us. Amen. وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Amin. Sohail, whenever you're ready.
We are reading from the 25th Flash, 6th Remedy. O sick person who complains about his suffering, I say to you, think of your past life and remember the pleasurable, happy days and the distressing, troublesome times. And you will surely exclaim either "Oh" or "Ah." That is, your heart and tongue will either say, "All praise and thanks be to God," or "Alas and alack." Note carefully, what makes you exclaim, "Praise and thanks be to God"? Note carefully, what makes you exclaim, "Praise and thanks be to God," is thinking of the pains and calamities that have befallen you. They induce a sort of pleasure so that your heart offers thanks. For the passing of pain is a pleasure. With the passing of pains and calamities, a legacy of pleasure is left in the spirit. With the passing of pains and calamities, a legacy of pleasure is left in the spirit, which on being aroused by thinking, pours forth from the spirit in thanks. What makes you exclaim "Alas" and "Alack" are the pleasurable and happy times you experienced in the past, with their passing leave a legacy in your spirit of constant pain. What makes you exclaim "Alas" and "Alack" are the pleasurable and happy times you have experienced in the past, which their passing leave a legacy in your spirit of constant pain. Whenever you think of them, the pain is again stimulated, causing regret and sorrow to pour forth. Since one day's illicit pleasure sometimes causes a year's suffering in the spirit, and with the pain of a fleeting day's illness causes many days pleasure and recompense, in addition to the pleasure at being relieved at its passing, think of the result of this temporary illness with which you are now afflicted, and of the merits of its interface. Say, "All is from God, this too will pass," and offer thanks instead of complaining. Since one day's illicit pleasure sometimes causes a year's suffering in the spirit, and but the pain of a fleeting day's illness causes many days' pleasure and recompense, in addition to the pleasure at it being relieved at its passing. Think of the result of this temporary illness with which you are now afflicted, and of the merits of its interface. Say, "All is from God, this too will pass," and offer thanks instead of complaining. There is a continuation of the sixth remedy in which he states in the notes, this flash occurred to me in a natural manner, and two remedies have been included in the sixth remedy. We have left it thus in order not to spoil the naturalness. Indeed, we did not change it, thinking there may be some mystery contained in it. O brother, who thinks of the pleasures of this world and suffers distress at illness, if this world were everlasting, and if on our way there were no death, and if the winds of separation and decease did not blow, and if there were no winters of the spirit in the calamitous and stormy future, I would have pitied you together with you. O brother who thinks of the pleasures of this world and suffers distress at illness, If this world were everlasting, and if on our way there was no death, and if the winds of separation and decease did not blow, and if there were no winters of the spirit in the calamitous and stormy future, I would have pitied you together with you. But since one day the world will bid us to leave it, and will close its ears to our cries, we must forego our love of it now, through the warnings of these illnesses, before it drives us out. We must try to abandon it in our hearts before it abandons us. Yes, illness utters this warning to us. Your body is not composed of stone and iron, but of various materials which are ever disposed to parting. Your body is not composed of stone and iron, but of various materials which are ever disposed to parting. Leave off your pride, perceive your impotence, recognize your owner, know your duties, learn why you came to this world. It declares this secretly in the heart's ear. Moreover, since the pleasures and enjoyment of this world do not continue, and particularly if they are illicit, they are both fleeting and full of pain and sinful. Do not weep on the pretext of illness, because you have lost those pleasures. On the contrary, think of the aspects of worship and reward in the hereafter to be found in illness, and try to receive pleasure from those. That is the end of the sixth remedy. Does anybody have any of their own thoughts? I know there aren't too many people here present, but go ahead, Faria.
Assalamu alaikum, Suhail. Yeah. No, I'm trying to see like the first part of the sixth remedy. I mean, this is a little different from the second part of the sixth remedy. So I think we should start with the first part in terms of how he's explaining about the complaints that every human being kind of always is involved with. I mean, when you speak to people, most of the conversation always revolves around either, oh, this happened to me, or this thing's, I'm going through this, or even something wonderful. There's always an aspect of some event or something that everybody suffers, and people like to, when they're talking to their friends or their like close ones, they always get into this kind of discussions and they talk about these things. So the author is, I feel, pointing out, hey, especially in the part when you read about the note carefully in the middle of that paragraph, I thought there was something that this author is trying to point out in terms of, why, as a sick person, why do I, who complains about his suffering? So that area. And then he says, I say to you, think of your past life and remember the pleasurable happy days and distressing troublesome times, and you will surely exclaim either oh or ah. And then he says, basically, your heart and tongue will either say. So I was thinking, how would my, with thinking about these pleasurable happy days and troublesome distress, how, what would make me come to saying this, that all praise and thanks be to God, I mean, but how, if we can maybe work on this together, inshallah. So I think Faria wants to add something.
So in other words, what I understand from Asim's comment is that we need to ask ourselves, which I was really thinking about, how does the passing of pain leads to spiritual pleasure? Is that your query as well? So yeah, so how does the passing of pain leads to spiritual pleasure? That's what I was wondering about. Thank you.
It's a good question. Does anybody have thoughts on that? There is a message from Hamim. How does the passing of pain lead to spiritual pleasure? Farah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. So yeah, the first part, and I'll try and give my opinion on the question posed about how the passing of pain is a pleasure. But it seems like the author states like, well, there's sort of two expressions of someone suffering or in pain. One is that, you know, he exclaims in these would otherwise, you know, don't express, you know, a specific or clear meaning, like, you know, the words oh, alas and alack. Or someone would say, okay, all of this has a meaningful source. This experience is there for me, meant for me to help me answer what I'm looking for. So this is exactly what I would expect and would want to experience. And, you know, the experience is perfect and consistent with my needs. Whereas the other one kind of is more of a cry of despair and confusion and lack of clarity, the one of alas and alack. So when I think about this idea of the passing of pain is a pleasure, I mean, it's clear that, you know, no moment is still. Everything is a continuous, of a continuous nature. And, you know, any time spent in pain, you know, it's not a permanent feeling, you know, at least the way we're experiencing it in our life. So there's a continuity that is also a reminder that of the very continuous existence of pain. So if I think about the very existence of pain, and that existence being in and of itself a moment of, you know, good news, in the fact that if something exists, it must have a source, and that source, you know, according to our conclusions, must be absolute and eternal and of absolute knowledge and consciousness, then the very existence in and of itself is a source of pleasure. So by that logic, the existence of anything, you know, an atom is a source of pleasure. And in this case, the very pain itself points to the fact that this is giving me a opportunity or a moment of meaningful connection and reminder that an absolute source is responsible for or behind this message, then that should become pleasure for me. Whereas this, and this is for the expression of, you know, and that leads to someone offering thanks, realizing that this is a very meaningful and meaningful and significant sort of experience or reminder for them. Whereas for the one who exclaims in sort of, you know, just a expression of despair and I'd say, you know, just like a cry of help in this case of alas and alack, for this person, it's a source of the pleasure and happy times, it says, you've experienced in the past, with their passing leave a legacy in your spirit of constant pain. So for an individual that's attaching that's appropriating or attaching any part of existence to themselves or to anything that is temporary or changing in nature, is always lamenting the loss of what they try to do. And they're always lamenting the failure of that effort, where you know, whatever that they gained pleasure from is just constantly disappearing or depleting or vanishing. And so their constant or persistent attachment to finite experiences, pleasure to finite experiences, becomes a persistent experience of pain. So that's how I got these two paragraphs.
Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I don't know if this will necessarily answer Fadia's question, but I just wanted to share some thoughts I had regarding it. Not necessarily to answer it, but maybe just share my thoughts. So, you know, the passing of pleasure, the passing of pain being pleasure, as the author kind of, as he claims here, you know, there seems to be this element of transience of a state of being that I don't like, and that transience there makes that experience leading to something that's pleasurable for me. And then in the second paragraph, he talks about how alas and alack are the pleasurable and happy times you have experienced in the past, which with their passing leave a legacy in your spirit of constant pain. So again, he's talking about this transience again, but this transience kind of working in the complete opposite mode, as in because of the state of being that I have lost now, again, because of its temporariness, now I am in a state of pain or something that I don't prefer. And then just one other note was, you know, in the second aspect, I don't want to go too far ahead, but I do think that they're related. In the other part of the sixth remedy, there was like the sixth remedy and then the second sixth remedy that was read today, where he says, if this world were everlasting, and if on our way there were no death, and if the winds of separation and decease did not blow, and if there were no winters of the spirit and the calamitous and stormy future, I would have pitied you together with you. Again, touching upon the sense of everlasting versus transience, but in the sense kind of saying, or at least I'm basically highlighting three different aspects that attracted my attention and trying to make sense of it, or what the author is kind of, how he's distinguishing these different sort of transiences or states of things being transient from one another, and how while I am subject to the same transience from one case to another, one being a state of pleasure for me, the other leading to a state of constant pain, and the other one where he says, I would have pitied you together with you if there were no death, or if there were no if this world were everlasting. So I do think that there is some sort of distinction that is being made here, but I just wanted to highlight this to see if also I think it's related to Fadia or Asim's question, and maybe others can chime in. Thank you.
Thank you to actually both of you guys for so yes, there is a contrast being positive about, you know, the same experience leading to two different sort of results, and how that I think I lost my train of thought here. I guess how one sort of, perceives those experiences from the past depends on what they sort of, feel about them. So as you, both mentioned, they sort of can elicit two sort of responses. One from the realization that it's past. So something that might have been troublesome is past, and that sort of brings a certain pleasure from it. And on the other hand, though, realizing that, there is a certain pain that you experience, and that pain can still be present from those past experiences. And remembering them can elicit them. So it's very interesting that two responses can be brought forth from them. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Go ahead, Faria.
No thoughts, but again, going back to that question that was initially posed, this last paragraph of the sixth remedy, I was looking how the author ends it all in saying, say all is from God, this too will pass, and offer thanks instead of complaining. Sure, I think we all can make sense of that, just like Asim started with his comment in terms of how human beings mostly get lost with complaint, and then obviously we lose sight of being grateful and thankful to the one that's bestowing everything. But I was still thinking about, it's saying all is from God, this too will pass, as in, yes, I experience transience here, I experience my experiences on a temporary base, but like, I don't want to have this kind of attitude, this too will pass. I don't know. I'm still thinking in terms of how to reconcile this whole human condition here, where you want to make sure that you're not, I guess it goes back to the initial question of how do I go on taking in the experiences I have for a more spiritual pleasure, because even in the last part where he says, since one day's illicit pleasure sometimes causes a year's suffering in the spirit. Oh, and that makes sense in terms of what everybody said with the alas and alack, right? So if there's no vertical connection to anything, obviously this universe itself is pain and suffering. It's like an infinite loop of never-ending pleasure. And then he goes on saying, and with the pain of a fleeting day's illness causes many days pleasure. So again, if you have the vertical connection, then any experience that you have that can lead you to acknowledging an eternal source. And so, and recompense in addition to the pleasure at being relieved at its passing. And with the pain of a fleeting day's illness causes many days pleasure and recompense in addition to the pleasure at being relieved at its passing. Think of the result of this temporary illness with which you are now afflicted and of the merit of its inner face. Obviously everything passed, they say, hey, time heals everything. But I think it's, again, being cognizant of the journey with each passing moment. But I was just curious to see what people's take are on when the author is saying all is from God, this too will pass. In what regards? Like the physical calamity that I'm experiencing in this world, yeah, that will pass. So I don't know. Sorry, I was just speaking out loud here. Just to make
Yeah, some others may have answers to that question, but I think the important aspect is to realize that, from this flash, being sick or experiencing pain is unavoidable as a human being. It's just the nature of the world. And one may ask, like, why must I go through those things? And I think he sort of points out why it's necessary, because it's really through that experience does one respond from all praise be to God, and all is from God. This it's a means to realize or to become aware. Otherwise, there's no reason for one to say all praise and thanks be to God. So, for example, if one never experienced some sort of quote unquote calamity or illness or pain, what's the reason for that to express that feeling or sentiment? And it's only by reflecting on those past experiences or reflecting on what one is going through does, on one hand, that pain may never leave you, but by experiencing it, do you sort of redirect that pain or redirect that feeling to the only one that can give you any sort of comfort or satisfaction or contentment, because he's the one that's able to relieve you of that sort of burden and pain. So I think that's what's interesting. It's the second step is usually forgotten, because quite often, at least just everyday language discussion, people always talk about this calamity, that calamity, this issue, that issue. For example, what the world is going through right now, or has gone through, let's say, a pandemic. There's always a blame on something else. Yeah, it may be painful. This is just one. I mean, this is just one thing amongst many. But there's no reflection on man's impotence or powerlessness, and the fact that all is from God. This too shall pass, and offering Him praise and thanks for relieving one of such a burden. Because how else does one know that he's being relieved or being sort of taken care of? I think that's really, interesting enough, is the remedy in and of itself. Your body may be cured or healed, but the real remedy is the remedy in your perspective, how you see the world, your worldview. That's what's important. Farah, go ahead.
I was thinking of the previous remedy we read about. I think it's also viewable at the moment in the screen, about like the youth, healthy. I'm rephrasing it immensely, but the idea being, someone with good health and sort of no trigger to really think and rethink or question significantly their life, are more likely perhaps to fall into heedlessness, as opposed to the ones who may have been afflicted with some sort of illness and get this opportunity to question and reflect more. And in this case too, it's very, it's not unusual to say that there could be somebody who lives a life without any major illness, talking about illness per se, not emotional pain whatsoever, but let's say illness or calamity. Like, it's perfectly reasonable to say that there could be people who pass through their life without having experienced that. And so making the fact that the one who does go through a calamity or an illness, it's actually a of strong importance and significance to them. And hence, this person is like, all praise and thanks be to God. Like, not that he's inviting this on himself or wants this to happen to himself, but when it does, he realizes, provided the way that he's interpreting it, he realizes how great of a awakening or reminder or opportunity this is for him to connect this experience, and give it as much meaning as it might have, as he can give it. At the same time, of course, he would want the physical experience to be relieved of himself. He doesn't want this to perpetuate. He's not asking for suffering, just so that this opportunity prolongs. So he says all good is from God, saying that there's I recognize the meaningful experience that I have been given through this pain, and I also ask for relief from this, and knowing that relief must come from the one who has meaningfully sort of afflicted him or sent this message or pain down to him. And I think this too shall pass can be looked at as like a physical relief, but it can also be looked at as like one's own understanding of and one's own increase of the meaning that they get from it. So the more meaning one is receiving and attaching to this experience, that can also be looked at as a way that that illness starts to fade, as opposed to just thinking about it as a physical relief.
Go ahead, Aditya Beza.
Along the lines of what Faria posed and what Farah just said, it's not so much that the physical pain is not necessarily what causes me pain. And I say this not in the sense of dismissing the reality of physical pain, but rather in the realization, I guess, like as I was rereading this text again, in the realization that I am infinitely needy, and yet I cannot make sense of my needs or guarantee or secure the meeting of these needs for myself, then it becomes painful for me to go through this process of, being sick or ill or being in a state of pain over and over and over again, or constantly. And in that physical pain, it inevitably, with this perspective, reminds me of death, and that my life itself is transient. And so if there is no meaningful aspect of me getting sick or suffering from physical pain, then that becomes, I guess, the existential pain, and it renders the purpose of my life for me. It makes it purposeless. So, thinking about what, all is from God and this too shall pass, it's at least what I understood from Faria's question was not saying that insofar as coming from a state of wishful thinking, because I think, it can be easy for me to kind of try to use that as a band-aid for all situations if I do not, reflect on what I am saying and what it means for me. Because it sounds good. Sure, everything is from God and it'll pass. But I guess what makes me uncomfortable with it, or at least what the uncomfort that resonates with me, is if I don't feel secure in this statement, if I don't have evidence for it. So I guess connecting this to the passing of pain being pleasure, the passing of pain shows me that the things themselves, and this part kind of connects to, I think, what Farah was kind of saying, that the things themselves are subject to an order, and thus the orderer. And even though I am still needy as I was infinitely in the first scenario, I realize that I am being so mercifully taken care of, because in my physical sickness or in my physical pain, I can, if I come to the realization of the one who gives health and who cures, and who sustains. Otherwise, the physical pain may pass and I may physically be in a pleasant state of being comfortable, but that existential pain will still linger, and suffocate me unless I address it and connect myself, or utilize it for its purpose and connect myself to what it's saying to me, as in feeling secure in my existence in a very broad sense.
But your comment and Farah's comment, Fria's comment, I think it sort of points to the importance of going through these, or having this experience. It's interesting. He doesn't, Farah mentioned the fifth remedy and then into the sixth remedy. He doesn't paint illness or calamity as a bad thing, because it isn't in and of itself. Yeah, you may experience physical pain, so to speak, but there's an orderliness to that pain in and of itself. The orderliness being that you can make sense of it. A meaningful aspect to it is order. There's a meaningful aspect to it you can make sense of. And not just make sense of it, but, realize that physical pain is temporary. And as Hatija Beza was saying, was that there's a more important pain that needs to be cured, and that's your existential pain, concern. And praise and thanks be to God, and all is from God, this too shall pass, are sort of remedies, answers to that pain. Otherwise, as Hatija Beza mentioned, it becomes meaningless. And so that physical pain becomes an eternal existential pain. So it's a very, different viewpoint to calamities and illness than is traditionally understood or accepted in society, because quite often you'll hear it being said that illness or calamity, they're evils in and of themselves, or they're enemies, as if they're an evil enemy. But they don't really know anything about you or really fundamentally care who you are. These are just things that are happening. And if you don't see them as, as reminders or sort of your teacher, your caretaker, sort of educating you and pushing you along a certain way, then it does become painful. But if you see that this is really the way in which you're being taught and educated, then how can you not be thankful, because the creator of the whole universe is trying to educate you through a temporary physical illness or pain. It's interesting how he's interpreting illness and interpreting remedy. The remedy, you may be cured physically, but that's not really the real cure, so to speak. Anyone else have any thoughts about this? About the first half of the sixth remedy? I'm not sure. Okay. All right. The Khadija Beza says, the temporary physical pain is necessary for me to be able to feel secure in and confirm all is from God. This too will pass. Yeah, exactly. Hence why it's temporary. It's people may not like to hear, but a reminder. So, do you want to make any other comments, Khadija Beza, on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was just also thinking about, it's not pain as in like, I don't know, like threatening or scaring one student or child into doing something. Because if I literally did not have any experiences of physical pain, no matter how great or small, then there is absolutely no way that I can think of that I would get to know one who heals or one who gives life or health. Absolutely no way. But then this brings up another issue in my mind, which is how do I reconcile different amounts of physical pain? If a small amount of pain, let's say a headache, or let's say, I got a paper cut, versus like an enormous amount of pain, which I'll just say just that much, physical pain, let's say, or even emotional pain that I undergo. How do I reconcile making sense of that if a little bit is enough? Or is it just the fact that no matter how great or small the pain is, from my perspective as a created being, because it is transient, it's still, as long as it reaps that eternal reward for me, then it's still acceptable, if that makes sense. Otherwise, my question would be then, why is it that I have to experience, a lot of pain instead of just a paper cut for me to be able to get to this conclusion, is a question that I have.
It's an interesting question. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, but I think one thing while you were speaking, I thought about was that, well, maybe two things. One, I guess, who defines that pain? Who says, a paper cut is more or less painful than, having a physical illness? I guess pain is defined by the self, really. Somebody may say something is more painful than the other, but who said? How do you know that? I mean, no one can really tell you one person's pain is the same as another person's pain. So that's one thing. But the second thing I would say is that question seems to me like, why does a teacher give harder and harder problems to solve, potentially? Harder, especially to a student who they know is up for the challenge or can answer them. I think the answer is because they know the student can bear it. The student can progress even further from a harder and harder problem to solve. I think that's what Nursi would say. And I think his fifth remedy kind of alludes to that. So go ahead, Fariha.
Along the lines of what you said, because I was going to use the teacher-student analogy, I think it's perfect in terms of understanding our experiences here, because yeah, everybody is in this educative journey, and the role of the teacher is just to make sure that the student is learning and developing. So sometimes the teacher may give a short quiz, mini quiz, a test, an exam, or a pop quiz. So in and of itself, they're just like an assessment. But at the end of the day, like, what do I do with them in terms of, it's really for my own personal learning. Like you said, that pain is defined by the self. And yes, in terms of no one desire or want to experience anything like huge. So let's say that teacher says, hey, guess what? You'll be given 5 quizzes, and if you do well, then you don't have to sit on the final exam. You're like, yay, that would be ideal. But let's say, ideally speaking, sometimes we don't pass all those quizzes. So then there are several, what I'm trying to say here, the teacher provides several options for the student to learn from. And so I think this is how we should be looking into our experiences. So if we tackle our experiences with this mindset, or taking in mind this analogy, then a test is just an experience for me to again connect my reality of who am I and what my position in this universe is. I'm not sure if that helped out, but yeah, it's a good question as well. Let me think more on this. Thanks.
Farah, go ahead.
And thank you for the interesting thought experiment said thus far, including that. Do I agree? Yes. The person defining the pain is giving their own definition. And I guess in this case, if let's say we are comparing 2 experiences of a paper cut and something more serious, we are primarily comparing their intensity based on, say, our physical experience of those pains. And so indeed, we can say very, clearly, okay, getting stitches is worse than getting a Band-Aid. But I was thinking that the comparison becomes hard, almost even unplausible, if we consider the fact that each of those experiences, whether a paper cut or something different, are or happen or are experienced in very particular moments of time, and in and of themselves, they are perfect and sufficient and exactly what is needed, what is the need of that particular moment. So while we compare the physical intensities, a paper cut is not that serious, but for that moment in which it is experienced, it is conveying or representing potentially exactly what is needed for the need of that moment, as sort of asked or requested or probed by the one experiencing it. And so if it is perfectly sufficient and meets all the needs in that moment, then both of them are, perfect in their own particular rights. And a comparison becomes almost, I dare to say illogical, but I'm happy to field any sort of objection on that.
Yeah, I think taking the experience or what you're feeling in that moment is what's important. Holding a comparison between two, it doesn't, you can't, there is no sort of objective metric, so to speak, out there. So really the only one who can quote unquote, be objective, so to speak. I mean, no one can really be objective, but what I mean to say is who can make a definition of something is the self. So maybe a paper cut is less painful than maybe not you experiencing illness, but maybe somebody else experiencing illness that you're close to or love, or somebody dying that's close to you. Maybe that elicits more pain than some quote unquote physical pain that is a paper cut. So it's to me predicated on how you see things. And a teacher who is smart or knows how to teach or knows what they're doing will present a problem in accordance with the capacity of the student, such that the student can progress potentially, or can progress in their understanding, and make sense of that problem, regardless of the nature of the problem itself. And to me, that's what illness and calamity and pain is, so to speak. It's something to make sense of, and it may be the best problem to solve, as he points out in the fifth remedy, because it awakens the self more so than quote unquote pleasure that one experiences in this world. Hadisha Basic, go ahead.
Okay, so I have multiple thoughts regarding what's been said. One being, I totally get what's being, at least I think I do, what's being said about like pain being defined by the person themselves. But at least I can say, I personally, as far as my experiences are concerned, I prefer a paper cut over stitches. However, so in trying to kind of make sense of this for myself, I guess there are a couple of aspects. One is, insofar as me making sense of any sort of physical pain and coming to the understanding that I am being brought into existence by one who is mercifully making me experience this experience, even though it may not be preferable to me, is far greater, like security in that, and that my need for eternal life is being met, is far greater than any sort of physical pain. So I guess from my perspective as a created being, I can say, yes, I prefer a paper cut over stitches. But as far as what it looks to, any sort of comparison would, as Farah said, be illogical, because I'm trying to compare a number to infinity. Having said that, or I mean, I shouldn't say having said that. So that's kind of how I'm trying to make sense of this. From another perspective, I do realize, like, trying to make sense of this as far as like instances where other people's free will is involved, and physical pain, maybe along with trauma or emotional pain, to give a little bit more explicit of an example, like if someone were to be raped versus a paper cut, I think definitely I prefer the paper cut. But as far as free will and things being just are concerned, for myself at least, I can say, for one thing, I am, again, not to forget my own position, that I am a created being and I have limited knowledge insofar as what everything looks to. But again, that's not to say that I still have to confirm the qualities of my creator for myself and be secure in the fact that he is just. And so tying this again back to the initial point about, you know, no matter what the physical or pain or trauma or emotional pain may be, as far as the painful experiences that I've experienced in my life, I can definitely say that the existential pain is always far greater. So insofar as that existential pain being addressed, it doesn't leave room for comparison, as Farah was saying, and it doesn't make sense for me to compare a number to infinity. Although again, I don't want to feel like, you know, grit your teeth and, you know, just be patient and then you're gonna experience it. Not like that, but like, you know, feeling the security within the pain itself.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. One thing I would say though is, you know, while one may not want to experience certain pains, on the other hand, if one were given the problem 2 + 2 = 4, and that was the only problem they were given, at some point it becomes sort of automatic. Like there's no thought into that. Like somebody says 2 + 2 and you just automatically say 4. Not because you don't know addition or you don't know what's involved, but it just becomes, it becomes reflexive. And to me, the necessity of different experiences and how one perceives them may be differently, as you said. What you want, what you would rather have or not have, is fair. But because they're so different, just like every number is different, you know, you don't become accustomed to the number itself. You don't become accustomed to one or just 2, but you experience different numbers or different experiences so that they all take you back to infinite or absolute. And I think that's, as you said, the most important aspect, is knowing many different experiences can be given, but they all lead you back to the same place. The other thing I would say is, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but I can only really speak for myself. But in my own life, I've never seen illness and calamity to be the predominant experience. It's, if you take it on a percentage term, extremely minuscule. If you think about everything else in your life. Now, those are the things we remember often because they don't conform to our expectation. But I've personally never found them to be the vast majority of the time, or even a significant minority of the time. Now, other people have different, you know, experiences, and they may find that to be different. But I would think for the vast majority of people, that's probably the case. But we remember them because they're so significant, or they elicit such an emotional response, possibly a negative emotional response. And I think that points to how strong that experience is, an illness or a calamity. It's something you don't potentially forget. And I think that speaks to the significance of why it's so important as a means to connect to the Creator. Ali, well, all these hands just went up. Ali Memra, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question to H. Beza. what do you mean by existential pain? Can you give some examples of it, please?
I don't think I can, keeping a straight face, but I'm sure people already know what that is. Hold on.
Well, I mean, while she's muted, maybe, I don't know if this is what she had in mind, but to me, it means a disconnect from something you're in need of, and that something is an eternal connection. So a connection to an eternal source, knowing that your existence is eternally guaranteed, and so on and so forth. That to me is that disconnect, and therefore not having that connection satisfied through this world, this temporary transient world, is what I would classify as existential pain. And I think Khadija Beza agrees. Ali, remember, did you have anything else to say?
Do we include in the expression of existential pain that this physical pain that we experience in this world, does it include the existential side of this physical pain? It means, how come that this pain exists? What is the reason for it? How come that I experience the pain? Where all these qualities came from? Does this existential pain, rather than, or I hurt my arm, for example, and it is very painful on my neck, something like this, this pain caused by the biological effect or physical effect on me is separate from thinking about the source of existence of this pain, from where it came to me. Is it the result of accident? Is it the result of bad luck? Is it the result of conscious choice by a conscious being to present it to me for a deliberate purpose? It depends on my perception of the source of existence of the pain I am experiencing while I am living in this world. If it is a bad luck, I cannot stop complaining about it. Why am I subject to accidental luck, bad luck? But if it is a purposeful act of creation directed to me, again, with intentionally to give it to me in order to let me realize something by a conscious being. In this context, I love the comment. Actually, I was waiting for the moderator, Suhail, to go back to this comment, harm input. The comment says, every experience is an opportunity for me to realize my position in this universe and respond back to this reality. What I understood from this beautiful comment, respond back to this reality means the reality of the source of existence's conscious choice to give it to me purposefully as the owner of my existence, as the owner of my being in this world. He is consciously giving it to me in order to make my life more meaningful for me within the context of this fleeting world, transient world. Because if I see it as the text says in this second sixth remedy, the beginning of almost the beginning, second line, it says, if this world were everlasting, and if on our way there were no death, and if the winds of separation and disease didn't blow, if there were no winters of the spirit in the calamities and stormy future, I would have pitied you together with you. It means if this were permanent, what I understood, and my pain is permanent, yeah, it would be just the reality of my being. But reality of my being is not like this. It is a transient world. I am put in the process of progressing, in the process of learning, experiencing, and there is an end to it. It means it is a temporary position. My existence is in a temporary position in order to get into another type of creation through death. So my life, being in this journey, while I am being trained by my conscious creator, the same conscious creator is inflicting on me a temporary pain. Because for some purpose, if I am conscious that this is deliberately done to me, it means understanding the existential side of this pain, I would be more or stronger to overcome the effect, negative effect of this pain, because I would say, this is a deliberate thing done to me by a conscious creator who gave me the sense of disliking pain. He wouldn't contradict himself. He told me in my instinct that I shouldn't like pain, and he was giving me the pain on purpose. What does it mean? Definitely, he is intending something good for me out of this apparently contradictory way of creating. From one hand, he doesn't want me to like the pain. On the other hand, he gives me the pain within a temporary base. It is not permanent, temporary base. There must be a purpose in this existence. So if I am not aware of the creator of this pain, then I would definitely suffer more for the existential pain rather than the physical pain. That was a beautiful context, actually, to think about. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Always taking what one experiences and reflecting upon it is our choice. And that is really what matters, is our choice to reflect on it and make sense of it, and knowing that it is the work of a conscious creator who makes a conscious choice, knowing who I am, and knowing what I want and dislike. Adija Biza, go ahead.
Thank you for your comment. So I just want to share kind of my takeaways, which isn't, I'm not going to be adding on anything to what's been said, but how, I guess, like, you know, I was talking to someone today and we were talking about how, like, she was undergoing some sort of physical pain after having cleaned her house, and she was saying, oh, but it's nothing, you know, compared to like what's happening in Syria or something else. And you know, I was also reading up on stories about like other traumas people have gone through, and I guess like inevitably what happens is, just as, or in a way, from an existential perspective, my experience of a paper cut is, from an existential perspective, you know, equal to someone else's experience of something a lot more traumatic. And in my, if I know of this sort of quote unquote like greater pain, and just greater pain as far as like the physical side of me is concerned, or the emotional side of me is concerned, not necessarily going into the existential aspect. If something happens to someone, or things do happen all over the world, right? There's a lot of like lack of justice. Then just as my paper cut is the same as someone else's, you know, again, not dismissing the reality of the situation, but something a lot more traumatic that might happen to someone else, then, and the sense of like, you know, need for justice that I find within me when I find out, then they both serve the same purpose insofar as the one, so on one hand, both my experience and that person's experience who has experienced something, you know, not even comparable to me as far as the creative perspective is concerned, they serve the same purpose, because in both of them, just as I can try to use the paper cut to reflect on my situation and understand that, you know, I don't like being in a state of pain, and just as I don't like being in a state of pain, nor does the other person, but these preferences have been given to me and it's saying something to me, the exact same opportunity is present in someone else who may be physically undergoing a much more unpreferable experience. At the same time, in the existence of these other experiences, which I might be horrified at knowing of, the sense of justice again serves the same purpose, because again, I did not choose to feel this way. The need for justice, or for things to be fair, is also given to me, and likewise this apparent contradiction, I have this need for justice, but I look at the world and it doesn't seem to be that way, is I have to question the purpose of the existence of this feeling. And if I'm not aware of the existence, of the source of existence of this feeling and the purpose of it, then that is true, again, injustice for me. And that is true pain for me. And I say this with a bunch of disclaimers, again, not dismissing like the reality of the situation that people may be undergoing physical pain or trauma or whatever the case is. And it doesn't seem fair to necessarily even compare my situation to someone else, maybe. But I think in that comparison, or lack of it, from the created to the created, but when I look at what that experience potentially looks to for me, or in reflecting on it, then that it serves the same purpose, and so I can try to find a sense of justice for others as I also feel, you know. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I took away from that is that things may not be equal in description, but they are equal in opportunity. And it's the opportunity that really defines what being a human is. The choice to utilize that opportunity. Any other comments? Or comments about the second half of the sixth remedy, the additional portion? Freya, go ahead.
I'm just trying to fill in the silence, but my major takeaways from the first part of the sixth remedy is really everything is a means or a veil for me to recognize the giver of bounty. Anything we experience, even without any, what do you say? Like, people say that usually that, time heals wound, or now, after a couple of years, I understood this. So learning helps me understand things from a different angle or point of view, which is great. Yeah, this is, I think, how philosophy teaches, the human mind in terms of, how to stay positive with every experience. But, like what I really found to be enlightening with the author's teaching, and it's really under the Quranic lens, is that everything is being connected to, yes, I'm experiencing things on an existential level, but it's being connected to the one that's taking me on this journey, or the one that's giving me my existence, the one that's making me experience existence, the one that's making me experience my health, the one that's making me experience all my feelings, emotions, and senses. So, with this sort of training and with this sort of understanding, then it sort of bring like a pleasure in our life where we know, or we know that everything is on a moment-to-moment basis. The way I experience things here, everything is transient, temporary, subject to change, but I'm in need of the one that is capable of providing me with eternal pleasure. So the first part of the sixth remedy really makes me realize all this. And it is within the human being that we learn from our mistakes. That's true. There's no development and growth without, going through this human journey. But at the expense of what? Like, how is this all happening? Who's the ultimate educator? Who's the one that's making me experience all this? So once I find the source, then you find everything. I don't know, maybe it's a verse or the author says something, whoever finds his Lord finds everything. So just my takeaway from the first part of the second remedy is this. And the second part is really about gratefulness, I would say, because, and I'm also like, when we're having conversation with anyone, like people, like, the first thing you just easily complain. You get lost in this train of complaint. I mean, that's how we are. And that's why this Quranic education is a must, that helps us get out of this mindset, helps us get out of, just being lost with the transience. Rather, we need to be thankful to the source of existence. And also the second paragraph, Hamim will highlight on the next page. So bear with me here. On page 270, it says, where did I pass by? You know, it says recognize your owner. So let me, this part, that's that Hamim is highlighting, the second paragraph, recognize your owner, know your duties, learn why you came to this world. It declares the secretly in the heart's ear. I think that's the matter in a nutshell. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an important line in that paragraph. Your body is not composed of stone and iron, you know, suggesting that you are not permanent, or you are not you are not immune to what befalls you. You can't repel them, but of various materials which are ever disposed to parting. Leave off your pride, perceive your impotence. So leave off your pride as if you think you're stone and iron. Perceive your impotence because you are composed of materials disposed of parting. Recognize your owner or the one who bestowed you or made you in this way. Excuse me, know your duties in that know what the reason or purpose is behind what how you're made and the way you're made and what you experience, and learn why you came to this world. Declares this secretly in the heart's ear. Remember, go ahead.
Now let's make a comparison as a result of what I heard from the last, all over the classes, what have been said. All of them were really useful, but the last comments were even to the closer to the center of the heart of the matter. Anyways, if I see a man working under slavery, and the master of the slave is whipping him, and he is running back and forth and doing the things, and he is sweating because he was running to do the chores for the master. And on the contrary, I saw a man in a park, again running, but for health reason. It means for pleasure. For pleasure. And he's also sweating. It is the case. Why I feel pity for the slave because of his sweating, not because of his being slave. That's not the part of the example I want to emphasize on. He's sweating, running and sweating, and not taking pity, maybe admiring the man who's running in the park and sweating again. What makes the difference? One of them, I feel pity. The other one, I may admire. Then if I was young as well, and if I was only able to run as much as this man is doing. Now, of course, the intention, the purpose in the action. One of them is, in my eye, this person is really suffering a lot. It is he is feeling pain because of the work. Whereas the other person who's running in the park, it doesn't really make me feel pity at all. Maybe it make me feel admire. It make me admire his position. He is healthy, he is running, because both of the actions physically are the same, but the realization of the reason why they are different in my eye, because one of them is suffering because he feels that he is just carrying a burden of another person. The other one is also sweating while he's running. He thinks it is good for his health. That's why he does it. Because of the cause of existence of the same types of actions, one of them is pleasure, the other one is not pleasure, maybe a pain. If we really understand that, while we are in pain, this pain is like the sweating of the person in the park while he's running for a good purpose, pleasurable purpose, preferable purpose, then this person doesn't feel pain, although he is running, although he is sweating. On the contrary, the other person who is running the chores of the master and sweating again, because he feels that this action has no meaning for him. It doesn't bring any benefit from him, although the same action. Now, again, this expression, existential pain, is more hurting than the physical pain. Existential pain means seeing the pain as purposeless, bad luck, naturally, blindly happening event that I have to suffer. But existential physical pain may turn into existential pleasure, saying that this makes my existence meaningful because I experience my reality that in this temporary world, my owner, as Fariha pointed out, my owner is giving me a training for a good purpose so that I will be spiritually healthier in order to realize what my reality is within this transient world of training. I am being trained to understand what my reality is, sometimes with good things that I like, sometimes the things that I don't like. They are both given to me, but the things that I don't like are given to me in a minimum level, as Suhail said it earlier on. Recognize your owner of the pain, creator of the pain, turns the pain in an existential pleasure. If you don't recognize the conscious creator of the pain turns into real pain, which makes you suffer more than physical pain. That's why people say, why me, why me? Because they see that this painful situation is accidental, purposeless. He has to suffer because these people feel that they are slaves of bad luck, unconscious luck. That makes them really, that puts them really in an unbearable position. Why I am unlucky, meaningless. But if they knew the creator of the pain, it would turn into a pleasure. My creator is preparing me for the Olympics. I will be the Olympics winner. How much they work with pleasure, those Olympic candidates. Yes, thank you.
Jazakallah khair for that. I think we are out of time, so unless anybody has any, comments they wanted to share, I think we can close. Sure. So I guess if there are no comments, we can close. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين بحرمة سر سورة الفاتحة.